Okay, so welcome to the lecture about composition. So how can you make something, let me rephrase that. So what makes something, look nice and look dynamic compared to something that looks less dynamic and less like wow in when you make something. And this is very important when you make your business cards and posters, as we think composition is what makes a asset really strong. So in our opinion, composition is composed of three different things: hierarchy, layout, and principles. So hierarchy is determining what's important on a piece of asset. Layout is how you specifically rearrange those items to make it dynamic. And lastly, principles is how to make each element in your asset pretty. So I'll be going over hierarchy first. So establishing what's important. Hierarchy allows the users to draw attention to a certain piece or aspect of a composition. For example, that may be a button on a web page, a big photo on a screen, or like a headline. So some general rules to follow are often just like one really big thing that you want your users to draw attention to, two medium-sized objects that are less important but also still essential to the composition or hierarchy or determining the hierarchy, and lots of tiny objects. So some examples are, this is pretty prevalent in typography, or establishing hierarchy in type using type. So for example, on the left where there's no hierarchy, so everything's like the same font, the same size, the same text, the same like color. And right is where there is hierarchy, with the most important things, as like I said, which are the titles, the secondary things, which is the time it was written, and like the small, medium size, the smaller things are just the text below it, which is less important than the titles. And you can establish hierarchy using font choice, fonts, colors, and like weights. Oh yeah, like here you can also establish hierarchy with your position. So like putting it at the top versus putting it at the bottom, or size. So for example, this is the top is where hierarchy is established. So the title's on the left and then the small text is on the right. And then you can also highlight like certain elements of that text using color and underlines. And the bottom's like, um, wait, let me get the bell. Let me get the door. And the bottom is like where there's no hierarchy applied. So now you've considered like what part of the composition you find most important, and how can you rearrange those things to make it dynamic and make sense. So a very common type of arrangement layout design is using the roll thirds. So if you're into photography, this is one of a very key, or like not key, a very most widely used composition layout guideline. So it means basically you place the most important item or call to action on the intersection points of either at the intersection points or on the lines of the thirds. So for example, this photo of the dog on a rock, the most important part is the dog, so it's placed on the third line, as you can see here. Same for for this like cover. At the intersection points, or at least three of them, the title's at the top left dot intersection, and then the guy or Dieter Rams is on the third line too. Another type of arrangement layout is the golden rectangle, or the golden ratio. So it's a ratio of 1 to 1.618. Essentially, and there's a tool here that you can use to measure that. Essentially, it's so you see this thing below. It's 1 is like the width or the height, and then 1.16 is the length, and then you repeat that. You repeat that. Oh shit. okay. So for example, you can also use this in text. So, or the text ratio between the different sizes or different font sizes. So for example, 20 point versus 12 point font size has a ratio of 1.6 to 1. And in this website design, the biggest thing takes up a ratio of the 1 to 1.6 and so on and so forth. And then you can see how the ratio is applied on this website. But usually, like, I guess for this specific layout design, it's less precise. It's more just a guideline for you to place your items. You don't have to exactly like measure out like 1.61. But you can always keep this in mind. And yeah, here's just some more really fun examples of that implied. These are more, obviously a bit more specific, but I think the National Geographic one is really interesting. Like it's exactly a ratio of, there's just a square. So, you know, well, it's not much, it's one of the most like basic applications of it. Other examples in the form of circles are the logos that you see here. So yeah, another way to rearrange your items is on a grid. So I'll be going over some key terms of a grid. So you have the margin. So that's the space outside your main body of the grid. Flow line. So that's where all the items the items that you want to arrange fall on the line. Especially this is more applicable for text. Module. So that's a square in a grid. Spatial zone is a series of gutters, or which are the spaces in between each module. A combination of that makes a spatial zone. Columns and rows are self-explanatory. And yeah, gutters are, like I said, the spaces in between each module. So, and essentially there are different ways you can rearrange your elements on a grid. And depending on the type of asset you have or the type of audience that you want people to read in. So you can use, if you're making like a manuscript or like a very text heavy type of asset, you would use like a manuscript layout, which is having a very like one big module or spatial zone to write your text in. And this also uses the the rectangle as well by having like yeah, just uses it too. Grids are columns. So using the columns of a grid, you can place your text and images within that grids. And you can obviously, you can also have some elements that overlap two grids or two columns. And yeah, and it's often very common in newspapers. They arrange everything in a grid just because in columns in a grid layout, just because it's easier to read like small columns rather than like long columns or long rows of text. Yeah, here's some more examples of different like uneven versus very even or symmetric types of grids, columns in a grid layout. So the left is like asymmetric, right is symmetric. You can also use a modular layout, so each module is used on its own. This is very common in like shopping layouts where you have each item in a grid or each item in a module, so it's modular. You can also use like the baseline grid where you use the flow lines of a grid a lot. So you basically align all your items within the flow line. So not necessarily within a column, I mean in a row, more so on the flow line. Hierarchical. So this is not really a grid layout per se, but it's just a way. It's just a thing that you keep in mind that you place the biggest item at the top, and you go down in size. Another way to rearrange your elements is as adhering to how people read a piece of information. So here is the Gutenberg diagram. Essentially, it's a diagram which shows how users read a certain piece of text, especially because we are English speaking, so we read from left to right. So that's why we are trained to read things from left to right. And if you see this diagram, we pay attention to the most on the top left and the bottom right areas of this diagram. So you read, so the orientation axis is like where you start reading from, and then in each quadrant of this grid, you focus on the beginning and the end. So your reading gravity often goes diagonally. So that means you pay attention the very beginning and the very end rather than like the middle two. But there's more emphasis on this on the top right grid, but rather than the bottom left part of the grid, just because you read from left to right. So this is common in a lot of website layouts. So you put the information that you want people to read the most on the top left, and then you have a call to action at the very bottom right, just so that's why people, or because people read information like that. So you put the two things you want people to read the most in those two areas. So using the Gutenberg diagram, you can follow different patterns. So this is the Z pattern. So that means you place information, you place your objects in the 1, 2, 3, 4, and in that order, the importance of, in 1 and 4, you put the more important objects there. Or you can also do a zigzag pattern. So you have multiple zigzags, and this is more common in like text-based assets. For example, here I guess it's similar to the Facebook one, but this uses the Z pattern where you put the logo and the create account and the text and the sign up in those 4 locations. And the most important two are the top right, the top left, and the bottom right. This is a zigzag format. So, for example, on a website, if you have like a list of different, of text, if you're trying to explain something, you can use this zigzag layout to arrange your items instead of just putting it in like a list. You can also use the F pattern. So this is a different way of applying the Gutenberg diagram. So you can start at the top left again, and then because people read from left to right, you you put the items at those locations. But because people would read less and less as they move down, you put objects that are relevant closer to the leftmost line, the leftmost column. So for example, this is with like websites, you put the biggest title at the top, and then you can put like your sub bullets below it, but then often people pay attention less as they go down. So you can think more carefully about how you want to rearrange your objects. Essentially, the ones out of the 4 things I've talked about in terms of like how people read information, there's the Gutenberg. You can use different layouts based on different requirements. So for example, if there's a lot of text, you might want to use the Gutenberg diagram. If you want to make, like either a website homepage, you can use the Z layout. If you have like sub bullets, you can use the F layout. And yeah, these principles are just used to build hierarchy when there's none. And however, if you have a very big focal point, it disrupts a lot of the previous layouts I just mentioned as people look at the most dominant object in the layout. For example, this uses like the comparing left and right. If you look at the right side, the focal point kind of like, even though we're trying to follow the F layout, the focal point of the image would break that as well, compared to like, just a normal layout. Another thing, again, ways to think about layout is alignment. So I think we talked about this in the typography section, but thinking about how you align your objects is very important too. So you can either edge align everything. So for example, this is a business card. Or example layout of a business card, you can makes everything aligned to an edge, either at the top, bottom, left, right. You can center align to create symmetry. You can justify alignment. For example, if you have like text, some people like to justify so it stretches the whole container. We advise most people don't do this unless it's a very stylistic choice, just because it's a bit unreadable as like there's like uneven gaps in between it. So use this with caution. Yeah, these are just examples of myself using the different layouts. This is center alignment. This is left alignment next to image, and this is like reversed. But I think, um, I think the general rule of thumb is like left alignment, just because we read from left to right, and this I guess uses more of the F layout that we mentioned before. Yeah. Yeah. So the last part of composition is talk about how to make it pretty, and that'll be covered by Brian and Ella.
Can you keep sharing screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So we're going through principles of I think more general like graphic design. And it's from a website by Samantha Leal. And then the first one is size and scale. So as we talked about before, like size depicts importance. So the biggest object usually grabs your attention. And in this case, it's also nice just because there's sort of difference in the two sizes, and the whale is usually bigger than the person. So like I guess like the before picture is more static, and then the after has more interest. It's less static, more interest in the picture. Yeah. Yeah. And the next is color and contrast. And then this is similarly also to create focus. The before picture, the guy is raising his hands, um, but it's very hard to tell. And then after it just highlights it well. So, yeah. Then spacing, white space is your friend, and then we have another slide after that tells you that. But the before picture is similar to the whale and scuba diver example. There's sort of not enough breathing room, and the similarity in scale doesn't really make sense for this picture. And it's also sort of static, maybe like less interesting of a picture. And then the after picture uses white space, has a difference in scale, and it's just more dynamic. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So white space. Don't be afraid of white space. White space is your friend. If you don't have a lot of stuff, just leave it up to white space. Basically, having sometimes less is more, and definitely if your brand or whatever graphics you're making lean towards the minimalistic side or more sleek or elegant, something like that, then white space. Yeah, just always white space. And then proximity, things that I think we talked about this before too, but things that are near each other or grouped um, convey that they are the same thing or they're shared somehow or they're similar. Yeah, and before and after. Alignment, like Jago said, alignment is very important. Always, when in doubt, always just align to something, center, left, right, just align it. The before one just hurts to look at. And the, the after picture is just center aligned. And that conveys, I think that just cleans up your graphic, and so it's not all over the place. It makes it tighter. And then balance. If you grab, I guess some of these principles are contradicting, but it depends on what organizing principle you're going to be using for your graphic. I think the general rule of thumb is not to mix them too much. Like you choose one and stick with it. And if you are going to break it, make it very intentional, because that's the first thing people will notice. But yeah, balance is just another one of those ways to organize a page or asset. Yeah. Then rule of odds. Things look better when it's odd pairs and not even. I don't know why, but that's just a rule of thumb. I think most people into it at some point. Yeah,
Oh, I think it's like to create symmetry, it's better to have odd numbered items. Yeah, because with evens, like if it's hard to make make it symmetric.
exactly. Yeah, then repetition. repeat elements to create, I guess, to emphasize that element or to create backdrop. Actually, I like the before one more, but besides the point, it's just another tool to use. Yeah. Then leading lines, it directs your eye towards whatever is most important, and it sort of very strongly tells you where to look in a picture. And it's extra clever in the poster because it has to do with string. And then perspective. I really like this graphic because I'm an architecture student, but because the before graphic shows the person working, but the after graphics sort of conveys more information. It shows the person working, but it also shows what's on the desk. And that's to say, don't be afraid. Don't default to like a standard conventional way to represent something. Sometimes a new angle is better for your brand or better for a graphic and conveys more information. And yeah, and then we'll go into business cards by.
I can switch to my screen. I edited a slide. It seems like we're looking at different slide decks, but I'm going to add on to what Brian mentioned about perspective, add a couple points there. Give me 1 second to screen share. Okay. So yeah, going off of that, I definitely think about what type of angles you can get to achieve more information. And then also on the lines of perspective, you can think a bit about atmospheric perspective, which is this bottom left image here. And think about, so atmospheric perspective is when colors closer are going to look more vivid and in the distance they're going to look lighter. And then we have linear perspective here, which like Brian's going to appreciate as an architecture major. And that's all has to do with, it's a whole mathematical system, and you know, things are going to look further away as they're closer towards the horizon line and your vanishing point. So for your business card, so the standard dimensions are 3.5 by 2 inch. And then you can also play around with the dimensions if you're like trying to be, you want to be a bit more creative. But typically this is the standard just because it fits in your wallet. And then here are some kind of printing guidelines if you decide to take your brand out into the real world. And then font size is good to keep in mind. 7 to 8 point is ideal, or do not go smaller than that. And this is all going to be available for you guys while you're working on your homework. And then here's some information about like what lines you want to pay attention to so that you can create in the center. And so you want to keep all of your key information at least 5 millimeters from the trim edge. And then here's a list of information you want to have. So company name, your role position, email address, logo, etc. And then when you're thinking about mockups, you definitely want to choose a mockup that best highlights your information. And so and also think about like what might be best when, like, is your business card going to be horizontal or vertical? And so you want to mock up that complements that. And also that often depends on like your logo. Like this is like a circular logo, and I think it works really well in this horizontal frame, but see the Fuse text logo looks really nice in the corner of the vertical. And here are some other examples of vertical versus horizontal. And kind of these play a lot with like 2 color palettes. So also think about which of your brand colors you want to bring into this. Typically, I think like 2 is really nice because it just keeps your information really clean. And then here are some more examples. And again, these are just like fun mock-ups. And there's a lot of like mock-ups that have like food and drinks and things like that. So if your brand is something along those lines, there are mock-ups for it. And some more. So yeah, and then also think about like what the background of your mock-up and what you can kind of include there. And whether you want, you know, what kind of feeling you want your business cards to have. Like this left one's more playful, whereas this right is definitely more minimalistic and professional. But the colors are definitely playful as well. Some more examples. And then just feel free to get creative and think about, you might not necessarily find the mock-ups you want to play with different materials, but it's worth thinking about when you're designing in general. Just think about your material and how that highlights your brand. Like this one's called Beer Table. So they have like this wood, which obviously kind of creates this like natural vibe, but also gets that kind of idea of a table in there. And so that's just something to think about. And even if you can't get into mock-up, it might be fun to design and to save for like the future. And then this one's just really cool. I think this is like a good balance of professional and playful because it's in black and white with a pretty sophisticated font. And the information is very straightforward and clear. But then the top side is all jumbled. So that kind of contrast in concept, it can be really nice as well. And then this one is a photography one. And again, they kind of think about material. Here they have this reflective side of the business card, which kind of alludes to, you know, photography materials and reflecting light. And then again, yeah, just have fun, get creative, kind of think outside of the box. There's definitely a lot of opportunity to create like interactive business cards. So that might be something you want to think about. And here's another example. This is really good. It's like a chair. This would be great for like, you know, if you have a furniture company or something like that. Or if your brand is a creative sort of art company, this may also be a good way to think about your business card, trying to make it something that can include other people and other people creating. And this one's clever because the brand's called Wildfire Events. So they've created this little match. I don't know what you would call that, match texture. So definitely think about texture, so, or whether you want something embossed or if you want something matte or something shiny. And I think there's a lot of mock-ups for that, but even if you can't find them, like it's just kind of fun to think about. And then some past student examples. So this is F by Claire Lee. And so this is like a self-care brand. And so here she's got like these little supplementary details off to the sides. And then she has her like main logo in the middle. And then this is Take Care. This was it was like a bath products brand, if I remember right. And the concept was creating these like hexagonal shaped bottles to ensure that things are like nice and orderly and condensed. And so she brought that kind of symbolism into her business card. And this is Local Transit. I think this is a really good example what to think about negative space. So you have the L and the T in black, but also you have this shape that kind of looks like you're looking outside of a train window. And then within that, you have atmospheric perspective with like the buildings and what looks like a pyramid, and then you have this extra layer behind that that's in a lighter shade that kind of pushes that through. And this is nudes. Sorry, these ones are a bit pixelated. And this is like a fun, playful noodle brand, and the artist brought in like the colors from the front and then kind of rearranged them in the other side of the business card. And this is LaRue. This is a rave brand, and so I think it's a good example of kind of like really interesting use of color and great kind of inspiration if you're doing a brutalist brand. And you can see there's like so much you can do with these mock-ups. Like they got this like rainbow kind of thing going on with like the sides of the cards, which is really interesting and thoughtful. So yeah, think conceptually beyond the boundaries of a business card. So definitely don't feel confined. Like I would just start designing outside of a business card and then kind of condensing it down later. And then also, yeah, definitely feel like make sure to apply the rules of composition and hierarchy and refer back to these slides for that. And then here are some printing resources if you decide to pursue this later. I realize I went over my slides, so I'm gonna pass it on to Katrina.
Cool, thank you. Let me share my screen. Oh, hold on. Cool. Wait, do you see this?
No.
Okay, hold on. Where is it? Where did it go? Oh my God. Give me a second. I don't know why, but it like disappeared, but I'm bringing it back.
Are you sharing it and then screen sharing? I mean, are you presenting it and then screen sharing or reverse?
I'm screen sharing first. Do you see it?
Yeah, we see the unpresented.
So we're good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. Cool. So I'm going to go over poster design. This is something you guys should be thinking about, but you won't be doing it this week. You'll be doing it next week, I believe. But yeah, it's just something to start thinking about when doing your brand, because I feel like posters are a really important asset that you can make. So why posters? People design posters because they come in a lot of sizes. They're flexible in terms of like if you want it to be a square or a rectangle or something funky. They have flexible messaging. They're fairly cheap. And you know, it's just like an effective form of marketing. When school was in person and clubs were doing recruitment, you could see like clubs like Innovative Design and Berkeley Innovation put up a bunch of recruitment posters at the beginning of each semester all throughout Sproul, and they were kind of like a good secondary asset to like the flyers people always like harass you with. And you know, posters are just there, they sit, and they're pretty, and they're fun. So I have a few rules of thumbs for poster design. You can take it or leave it, but when I'm designing posters, I like to make them really bold. I feel like posters can be a little bit more experimental than, say, like a website or packaging or something. So just like, don't be afraid to experiment with it and have fun and really push the boundaries of your branding guidelines that you've created for yourself. Try to make it high contrasting, so alternate between visuals and text if you're making a series of posters. Just contrast with colors, just introduce like a lot of vibrancy and pictures and illustrations or like whatever brand elements you think fits your brand the best. And lastly, make a series of posters. Don't just make one. I feel like it's really fun to put them into mock-ups. Like you can see how like on the streets sometimes they have like sets of 4, 8, or 9 posters all together, and they kind of play off of each other. We'll go through a lot of examples later today and you'll see, but I feel like making a series versus just one really creates like a visually compelling advertisement. Here are a few more rules. Just make sure the type is large enough to be viewed. Posters are kind of meant to be viewed from far away, to catch people's eye. Just have a really simple and clear layout so that your reader kind of knows where to find the most important information. Just tying back to those rules of hierarchy we've gone over. Include important information in your poster. If it's an event, include the date, time, location. Have the most important messages emphasized by like either the type size or hierarchy or color or value, and have art that relates to the message. So if you have like an event, maybe have an illustration or a photo that kind of depicts what that event is about, and just arrange everything, going back to like composition and everything we've pretty much gone through in this lecture, and bold, intense colors. But that's just like a take it or leave it thing. If you have a muted pastel or like very minimalist brand, obviously do what works for your brand. So this is just a really quick example. This is something I made when I took the branding class 2.5 years ago, and I branded like an Asian fusion restaurant, and so I kind of went with like 9 different posters, and each one, this only has 6, but each one had like a different food or like, yeah. These are more examples, just running off of the food vibe that I was giving, but just play around with like the layout, the composition, with the information, make it really visually compelling, but also really legible and easy to understand. These are more examples. So you can kind of go in the typography route where you're just really emphasizing the letters and playing with those colors, or you can mix it and like have like a slogan or something, or like something really clever and cheeky, and then a little bit of information down here if readers want to like zoom in and like read it, and then like a cute illustration. So it's really up to you and how you play with it. This is kind of going back to what I said about having a series of posters and alternating between pictures, type, picture type, picture type, or like combining the two together. Nike did a really great campaign, just pairing really strong imagery with just this very like cute, cheeky slogan. Yeah, here are just a few more examples. It's just don't be afraid to like play with type, play with colors, play with movement, and then introduce, a lot of imagery into it. Websites and resources like Unsplash and Pexels, and I think Burst are like really good resources if you want commercially licensed, free, like high quality photography to use. This is a series of posters created by who was previously the brand director of Spotify, who actually spoke at RGB, which is an event which was hosted by Innovative Design like a few weeks ago, and he was kind of behind Spotify Wrapped, which was really cool, but he also made this for a little freelance job, and I thought that was really cool. And he really played with like the imagery and then like kind of taking the colors from this picture and applying it to the posters. And these are more examples. Again, going back to the Nike campaign with the green. This is just playing with typography in a really experimental way, or like not even including too much information, rather focusing on the shapes and the abstractions and like the shading. This is another example, just a lot of words put together, but you can see kind of like the important information that you need to know like all throughout this. This is a more example of like a clean, minimalist, like really laid out, intentionally aligned type of poster. This is another series of posters. This was created by one of my favorite studios, Sirius Studio, and they really do a great job of kind of incorporating illustration, typography, and imagery all in one in the series of posters. So like don't be afraid to like do too much, but also like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like they really achieved this, and like it doesn't look busy, it looks like intentional and cohesive. So yeah, just like have fun essentially. This is another example, another job they did for a clothing brand, I believe. Yeah, they just really paired everything well. And this is another example. This is a Thai restaurant. And this is another example. Yeah, you can pair type with imagery, just layered it on top, or just alternate. Yeah, I am literally just throwing more examples at you. Cool. We're also going to go through past examples of posters from last semester. So this was Claire's, this was a skincare brand that Ella went over with the business card. So she made these posters to go with it. And I think she did really like effective job of like playing with the logo as well as choosing really thoughtful imagery. This is the Nudes brand. And I thought it was really clever how she kind of had this divide and there was just this gradient really popped versus like how other people see noodles. This was a birth control male contraceptive brand, and I thought she did a really good job of just like mixing and layering the type on top of like this very subtle but like cool imagery. And then going back to the Brutalist brand, this guy really just did a crazy job with like Blender and mocking up and rendering like a 3D thing for his club brand. So yeah. Your homework for this week is basically make a business card design. Next week, I believe it's going to be a poster design. So just kind of think about the two and how you kind of want them to interact, if you want them to be really similar, if you want them to be really different. So yeah, design your business card, just brainstorm and research kind of how you want it to look, what size you would want it to be, determine the type of content that you want to have on your business card, and create 3 different designs to present next week, each in a different kind of like direction you would want to go with, ideally on Illustrator, and eventually you will have to mock it up in Photoshop using the tricks and tips that we taught you 2 weeks ago. So yeah, that is your homework. And that is the end of this lecture. So if you guys have any questions or comments, we are